Dude, you can't fix a printer, dude. I thought you were a computer whiz.
It just don't work.
You're a computer whiz.
I'm a computer whiz, not a printer whiz.
Wow, what's up, dude? Matson's here for work. The printer, he can't get the printer to work still.
Not working, bro.
Jesus.
That's why.
Bro, it just came on. Dude, is it showing that it works on your computer screen?
Yes.
Oh my, so custom is back?
Custom is back.
Do you even trample?
I'm hyped as well now. I'm ready.
Welcome back to another episode. What show is this?
This is Do You Even Trail, Bro? 6.
Boom, 6. 3-6 Mafia. What else is in the 6? What else?
Onewheel Gang.
Onewheel Gang.
It's not a 6, but gotta represent.
Boom. All right, so where we been, man?
We've been working. We've been shredding. It's been a while. It's been a few weeks.
I know we said this was going to be a weekly show, but it's turned into be like a bi-weekly.
Yeah, you know, nothing wrong with...
Does bi-weekly mean like twice a month, or does that mean 2 times in a week?
That means every 2 weeks.
Boom, it's bi-weekly.
Yeah.
And, you know, don't hold me to that. We might go back to weekly. It's just when the workload is going crazy, we got to do the workload. Like this is a luxury for us.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
It's a pleasure project, you know?
Pleasure project.
Yo, what's up, Jeff Adair? Get on in here. Open our crib. Let me show you around. Alright. Here, we got our printers. This is the newest addition to the bad boy. Alright? We got the OG over here. This thing's been a solid workhorse for custom printing, but out with the old, in with the new. This thing's bigger, better, faster, all of that good stuff. So custom is now live. Get it while it's hot. All right, moving on. Matson, what's going on over here? What we got?
All right, so obviously, order packing station, right? All the orders come here. We print them out, right? Signed here, everything. Write notes, stickers, box up any larger packages or orders or whatnot.
All right, so let's go see what Jeff's doing.
Yeah, he's making grip tape in the back. Let's go see.
Alrighty, yo, Jeff, what's going on with the orders?
How many we got?
Like 50.
Yeah, let's go turn the light on and start working. All right, come on back. This is where we do all the grip. Safety. Oh shit, hooked it up. You notice how I kind of brought it in? I taught the boys that. So what's new with Onewheel?
With Onewheel?
Yeah.
Well, they just had Jimmy Chang on their podcast talking about selling parts.
Jimmy Chang,
So,
what's good, dude? I think it was very constructive. I want to say from the show, there was like a little nugget of delight talking about maybe selling parts. Then there was like a survey that they sent out, the Onewheel headquarters sent out to all the riders. And in that survey was like, hey, do you want us to sell parts? Therefore, is something bubbling in the Onewheel factory? Are they maybe going to sell parts?
I'm thinking they might.
You know, maybe I'm thinking a little optimistically. You know, I am an FM fanboy. However, let me just go on record to say this. Kyle, Onewheel, and friends, do us a favor, because me, I'm on board. But to get everyone on board, all you have to do is sell parts and make a pro mode, riding mode, because what you're going to do there is you're going to take pushback off. And maybe when you enable that riding mode, maybe there's some sort of warning sign that would take the liability off of Onewheel. I'm not sure.
Nice.
I mean, I'm not suing Onewheel if I get hurt, but going on record, that would just solve so many issues with people complaining. Yeah. So on the record, Kyle, you're the dude. I'm probably going to have some comments for that one.
Yeah, I mean, everyone likes to hate on FM, but they brought you this device that brings you so much joy. Can they really be that bad?
And that's my biggest argument too, like the pro hardcore Future Motion haters. It's like, dude, they made the Onewheel.
Yeah, sure, they may not have the best customer support, repair business model, but they made the Onewheel.
They're great. Tony the Tiger style. Can you hit one of those?
They're great.
That's not a good one.
They're great.
They're great.
That's what I'm saying.
All right, well, cool. So that's what's news in the Onewheel world. Hey, what's up, guys? I need you to go to the very top of the description and click the link that says sign the petition. I need you to go here and tell your inspiring Onewheel story to help save Onewheel. They are under attack from the CPSC, and we need everyone on board to help save this awesome sport, this awesome hobby. Man, this has changed mine and my son's life in a very positive way, and I'm sure it's done that to many others. So let's go ahead and click the link, and let's get it. Thank you. Back to the show. What's some news around here?
News around here? Well, I'm glad you asked. There's always something new going on at Onewheel Parts, but today I would like to announce that we are partnering with Matthew Shumaker on his new 357 rail drop. So that's going to be pretty sick.
That's going to be so sick. You know, ever since I came into this game, we had the W's, we had the tail rails. And then we had this company called Tech Rails that came out with a plethora of awesome new various rails and all sorts of different height adjustments. That was kind of like
It was game changing. Yeah.
Jinx, 1, 2, 3, 4,
Let's
5, 6, 8, 9,
go.
10. Yo, me a Coke. Boom.
Let's go.
So, yeah, shout out to Matthew Shumaker of Tech Rails teaming up with Onewheel Parts because we're about to get it in. The 357s. Let's actually start off by talking about those. Word on the street is that there's two different styles of these 357s. We have the regular solids, and then we have the truss versions where they almost look like a Skeletor kind of vibe.
Yeah, they're just like a light framework of different trusses and braces.
Because of the kind of like truss system that he's built with those rails, he's really kind of taken account of like where the actual strain is happening around the landing when you're on the one wheel and the strain that the rails take. And he's more aluminum there, but in parts that really wasn't using it, we shaved some off.
It's reinforced where it needs to be and hollow where it doesn't need to be.
He just summed that up so well. He saw me struggling. You could have jumped in a little earlier.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt, you know.
He's got manners.
It's rude.
That's okay. I interrupt all the time. I'm rude boy, I guess. Didn't Rihanna make a song about me?
Rude boy?
I think there's a song from like the 2010s like called Rude Boy.
Hello guys, this is Mattson from Onewheel Parts and Onewheel Family, and these are 357 rails. 3.5 degrees up on the nose and 7 degrees up on the tail. First rails in the wild. These rails are the sickest rails. It has a lowering kit and a raising kit, not the float life one. This is the Matthew Shoemaker version. You can see right here, the Matthew Shoemaker version. These rails also have the carbon fiber rail guards. They are fantastic. These things rip. I was ripping them last night and bomb rails, all right? These things are so sick. It is so fun.
The cat is out of the bag. What is the show about?
The show is about rails.
Boom. So I feel like to talk about rails, let's just do a base like history of rails. Like you're an OG. Like what's the first rail you remember? The first aftermarket rail?
The first one that I think was ever made was, hold on, let me look this up. Shit.
It was called Beast Wild, or it sounded like a strip club. But then they had the Ruckus rails.
Hold on.
I've been studying this. I was up late last night studying the rails.
It was Beast Wheel rails.
Beast Wheel. Shout out to Beast Wheel for maybe being the first aftermarket rail available for the Onewheel market.
Yeah, I mean, we started off with Beast rails. Back then, rails were only meant to be, the reason they had aftermarket rails was just basically to extend it so you could run a bigger tire. There was a plethora of different aftermarket tires. People were putting 8-inch Hoosiers on there, Dunlops.
8-inch Hoosiers?
All wicked tread patterns, too. They looked insane.
Dude, on muddy days with the sick tread patterns, dude, I'd make like a shirt.
It'd be sick.
Like Forrest Gump did with the smiley face.
That'd be badass.
Shout out to Forrest Gump.
But yeah, we had Ruckus rails as well. The flight fins. Flight fins had one. The flight deck? No, not the flight deck.
So flight fins probably came out with rails
Flight
because
frame.
people were bending rails from having flat fins and jumping, right?
Yeah, the flight
Sick.
frame came out for that.
And were those obviously those rails were probably stronger, right?
They were extended. I'm not sure if they were.
The flight fin rails weren't stronger?
I mean, I don't know.
I'm going on record without knowing the facts and saying they probably were stronger. I mean, dude.
I would assume they would be.
Yeah, why would they not make them stronger?
Yeah.
Shout out to Flight Fins for making
Let's
awesome,
go.
strong rails for your flight fins when you're coming down. Send it Sam and Kyle Hansen. What's up?
That's what I'm saying.
So who was like back in the day sending it on flight fins? Because like Sam and Kyle, like, were they in the very beginning? Who was in the very beginning? Flight fin stuff.
Very beginning was probably Mr. Ori Rush.
Oh, I love Ori.
Original sender.
Ori Rush. Shout out to you, dude. Thank you for letting Jeff use your Pine X that day at Float Life Fest. And you're the man, bro. I'm seeing your new trails that you're putting together. Looking dope. Shout out to Ori Rush. And Michael Wilson, your partner in crime. Flight fins all together. Let's get it.
Heck yeah.
All right, so that was where the first few rails. We had Ruckus rails, we had Beast rails, and we had...
Whoa, Beast.
What was it?
We had Beast wheel rails.
Okay, we had Beast wheel rails.
And then Buck Wilder's rails.
And then Buck Wilder's rails.
We had the flight frame.
The flight frame.
And Ruckus rails.
And Ruckus rails.
Those are really the 4 or 5 OG ones that I can really remember. They were all just extended rails.
Sick. Leave a comment if we are missing some out. I'm
let
sure
us
we
know.
are. Yeah, we were kind of doing some research trying to figure out the first rails. So, boom. After Future Motions rails, of course.
Yeah, you know.
So, moving on, like, let's just jump right into the first set of rails that you remember besides those. Were they tail rails or W rails? They were W's, right?
Yeah, I think they were W's.
So give us the story. I've heard a story from someone that was pretty interesting about the W's. Do you have a cool perspective of a story of like when you first saw the W's and what you thought?
I do. So it was right before
Dirt Surfers.
Right before Dirt Surfers. Brad had gotten there before I did. I was driving on the way up.
Shout out to Brad being
That's
early.
what I'm saying.
If you're not first, you're last. All right.
And totally lost my train of thought now.
All right, I'm going to tell this story. I think he is the one who told me the story, so I can tell it better than him.
Definitely, you've never heard this one.
Let me guess then, can I?
If you want.
Okay, I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess that I'm your experience right now, okay? Because I think you told me the story. Okay. So there I was. I'm Austin, and I was like combing my hair, and I was putting like Pantene Pro V in it, and it was looking real silky, and I stepped out of my car. There, coming up the street on the black asphalt at Passion Play is none other than Bodie Harrison. And when I'm looking, I'm squinting my eyes, trying to visualize what I'm seeing under his feet, because it's something I've never seen before. They're bent rails under Bodie Harrison's feet. Yes, the power under Bodie's feet is so awesome. He jumped on some straight rails, permanently bent them at the perfect spot, and showed up and took first place at Dirt Surfers. What up? Is that not your experience?
That is not anywhere close to my experience. So I was scrolling through Instagram and saw a post about Dirt Surfers. There was some Float Life guys there a little bit early testing out the trails. And in the corner of the video, it looked like somebody's rails were all like got ran over by a car. And
I like that.
They had like bent them down and then hammered them back up is what it looked like.
So you see some rails and you're like straight up.
Yeah, I was like, whoa, that's some... The hell? Oh,
I was doing a little bit of riding earlier. So
yeah, so I saw those rails and was like, whoa, somebody's like been riding hard. And I called Brad and I was like, yeah, what's up with those? And he's like, oh no, that's Float Life's new rails that they came out with. And I was like, no f***ing way. Because it looked like wavy and like hammer marks in the picture. Because it was like a grainy video. But when I got there to see them, it was like, those are clean.
Oh yeah.
Those are clean looking.
That's awesome. So the first time you ever saw W's, you thought they'd been ran over by a car. That's hilarious.
That's
I've never heard that story.
What I had thought.
I've never heard that story, and it's hilarious because, yeah, I could see you thinking that if you've never seen any sort of aftermarket rails besides like straight rails, and then all of a sudden you see these W's over there, and you're like, what the heck are those?
It looked wicked.
Yeah, so my first aftermarket rails ever were W's.
Oh.
Shout out to Rent eBoards DFW for hooking them up. Yeah, I saw what did it for me was I think I had bought the Cush Wide and the Maxxis 5.5 tire, and that was like my first mods. And so as I was looking at more content, I saw the Float Life crew ripping up downhill. I think it was at Tahoe, but it was like, look at these rails ripping down this mountain. And how they were whipping it around was so dope that I was like, I'm getting those. So I bought them, and I at the time I called my mentor fuser, and I'm like, dude, I just ordered these W's, and he's like, bro, you're not gonna need them. They're for downhill. We don't have any downhill. So what do you think I did? Took them to Arkansas, baby. Yeah, so I went and rode Mount Nebo with them, and like the first time you ever take W's on the trail, you're like, oh, dude, these are hard. And so there's just one of those things that you got to get used to on the trail, because the very first time you're not going to like them as much as your stock because of the clearance in the front. Once you learn how to ride them, though, they kill the stock rail. So the W's are a lot of fun. Really liked them. Yeah, they were my first aftermarket rails.
Heck yeah.
Have you ever had them?
No. I've never had any aftermarket rail. I'm a straight guy.
Well,
Straight
look-
rails.
Well, look at this dude. He's too good for rails. On the rail episode.
Just no experience.
Oh, looks like I'll be doing a lot of talking today.
That's what I'm saying.
All right.
I got no experience with them.
So I tried the W's, and man, on the street, they were fun. For me, going around corners on these flat trails here in Dallas, I think they're the win. A lot of people like straights for that. So the next rails that I got were the tail rails. Don't we have some tail rails over there?
We do have some tail rails. We've got the tail rails.
Boom. Let me get a set of stock rails. Okay, so my first Onewheel was with these, right? And then eventually I switched to the tail rails, and I loved them. Let's take a little look real quick at what you're getting.
Look-see.
So see all this? This is called tail dragging, okay? This is called heaven, all right? These rails right here, if you're riding an XR and you're riding anywhere that's elevated downhill, they are literally a cheat. You can send hills like none other where you're not going to tail drag and wreck. And so what I noticed though with certain riders that are really good with these straights is they hit everything at an angle.
Correct.
You
That's
know?
what I do.
And so with the tail rails, you don't really have to do that as much. Now, the nose should be the same, right?
Yes.
And so, yeah, I guess you could still do the angle on the up, but on the way down, no angle needed. What was your first experience with the tail rails?
I had saw them online.
Out of the W's and the tails, which ones would probably be your favorite?
Oh, tails for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, the W's, I feel like only certain people really rock with them, and with the tails, I feel like they're like 100% across the board. You would like them. You know, one thing I've heard about the tail rails, though, and this is something that you just kind of get past, is it does cramp your back leg up a little bit from being up. But
I guess. I mean, if you're riding a lot, you're not going to really notice it.
yeah, no, I really, because when I started riding them, I noticed it maybe, but then it was like gone so quick that when I hear people complaining about it, I'm like, you just probably don't ride enough, because that was gone instant. So the tail rails are 10% kicked up in the back, I believe.
10-degree angle.
Is it a 10-degree angle?
I believe it's a 10-degree angle in the back, whereas the W's are what? 7 on each side or 5 on each side? I think it's 5.
Nice.
It's 5 degrees on each side, front and back.
Yeah, the W's, dude, they're just so low. I mean, they're money for drops. They're money for street.
When they've got that angle, so it feels like you're like, I've ridden all the rails configurations, and I mean the W's feel so stable.
Yeah.
It feels like you're on a Formula 1 car because those angles.
All right, so the Flow Life has the varials, right?
Yeah, they got the varials out now.
Okay. So basically, I think what that is, it's like any rail setup in one.
Yeah, it's like a fully modular rail system. So you've got a front piece, middle piece, back piece, and can adjust the tilts, the drop, whether it's straight, wavy, all that good stuff.
Shout out to the Flow Life, dude. That's sick. All right, so now what's left to say about XR rails is tech rails, baby.
Heck yeah. 357s.
We're not talking about 357s yet because we're talking about the XR rails.
Tech rails.
All right, so the first rails that came out, I think, were called tech rails, to be honest.
Tech rails, switchblades.
Yeah. He started out maybe like 15 months ago and just made a batch, and it was so successful that, yeah, he's made a whole side business now selling one-wheel rails and other components for your one-wheel.
Yeah, he's been absolutely killing it. It's crazy what he's been able to do.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? Pints need love too.
Yeah.
I mean, he actually has pint rails, aftermarket pint rails.
It's pretty sick.
Heck yeah. So, with the XR, I think we covered it. We had the W rails, we had the tail rails, we had the varials.
The growler rails.
Oh, we didn't even talk about the growlers. Like, what's the growler?
Correct.
What's the growler and prowler and Shrowler?
I'm not even sure the difference. All I know is the growler rails are a little bit shorter, so you can accommodate a pint hub and pint tire on an XR frame.
That sounds sick.
It's fun for tricks. It's a lot of fun for just messing around on the street. It's a blast.
Yeah, Thor was ripping it on that trail on that prowler. That looked really sick.
I've ridden trails on a growler before, and it was a blast.
Nice.
It was fun.
Sick. Send it. All right, so let's move on to the GT rail. That's going to be the hot ticket item. Let's bring out that GT stock.
We've got the stock GT rail.
Booyah. And what you're not going to want to do with your stock rail is sandblast the serial number. Do not do that, kids.
Yes. Not good.
Not good. Future Motion, for some reason, likes to have the serial number with the rails. But so anyway, yeah, GT dropped about a year ago. There's only 3 rails at this moment for it. We have the Lightnings, we have the Mustache, and we have the Sabre.
The Sabre rails. Well, technically there's 4.
Well, the 357s have not dropped yet.
No.
So Shoemaker right now through Tech Rails has the Sabres.
Correct.
The Sabres are. Let's real quick talk about all the degrees.
Well, yours. The one-offs.
We're not going to talk about that yet.
The tail rails.
Greetings, guys. We're down here in front of the shop away from the studio because we had to go ahead and get it in with Mattson. We're doing the rail episode, and so, I mean, the dude made the first DIY tail rails for the GT. Mattson, how did you come up with that?
Wanted more tail clearance, saw there's no space for a smaller bumper because there's a massive battery there. Thereborn was a...
We're shooting a show, bro. Anyway, sorry, Mattson. I'll kick your ass, bass. I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding, bro.
I went to Lowe's, right?
Why not Home Depot? He is bougie as hell. You already see that. That's what I'm talking about.
All right. I went to both. Found angle grinder, and I already had a little welder. And I did a lot of research.
Corey is not little. He's tall. Oh, you meant like the... So did
No,
you go...
this was like the first iteration.
Okay, so you didn't go to a professional welder the first time?
No. The first couple times, actually.
There's been multiples? Nice!
Yeah. So, first couple sets, I don't know, maybe 7 welds worth.
Is the audio good? Okay.
7 welds worth.
Hold on, I fucked up your audio real quick. 7 times you went to the welder?
Me.
You welded it?
Me, yeah.
So the first thing you did was hacksaw
I was
this.
design different like welding patterns or whatever, try to test which is the strongest, right? And after a lot of research, you find that welding is aluminum doesn't take heat very well, right? And through a lot of research, I go to this guy, local guy. His name is Corey. He's epic. He's an epic
Corey McDonald, shout out to you. He even flies in the air and stuff.
Oh yeah, and
take me on one of them rides, dude.
He literally flies, paraglides. But he owns this business. What's it called?
We should have done research. Sorry, Corey. But Corey's badass welding service. We put the
Yes.
link in the description.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
I love that. You can just know nothing, but just say put the link in the description. It's awesome. But anyway.
All right, but basically, he works on cars. He works with a lot of metal welding, cutting, all that. And I hit him up, and he was like, "You probably should have come to me first."
But I like your style, though. I like your style. Just get it done.
Exactly. So of course, talk to him, discuss whatever. First Corey iteration came out. Broke that one.
And that's the one that you kind of still have, like, right? That's like the same kind of form.
Kind of, except it's not the strengthened version. Right now, what's on my board has not broken at all. It is significantly stronger.
Good job, Corey.
Yeah, and that's what you have. The significantly stronger version.
Ugh. So thank you, Mattson, for being the awesome maker and guinea pig and presenter for some awesome rails for me to get, because I was like, dude, I got to get those too. So Mattson and myself have the only DIY tail rails until recently. They've been spurting up. I know the Onewheel
Yeah, we got
family.
it.
You got the whole process, so we'll leave a link in that in the description as well.
All right.
Just using that card all day, just swiping it. Link in the description.
Yep, description.
Take it away, boys.
All right.
He's jumping the gun.
What's
but yes,
up with that?
I do have some DIY tail
There's
rails.
technically 4 rails out on the market right now.
Yeah, but we're just talking about obtainable market rails that everyone that's watching the show can get. So the Lightnings were first to market, and shortly after them, we had the Sabre rails, which is from our homie Matthew Shoemaker. The Sabre rails are, I think, 7 and 7.
I believe so.
So there's that. Sabres. I have not rode the Sabres, so I can't say much about them. However, I do know a lot of people that do ride them and like them.
Yeah, I've only heard really good things about them. So.
So the next rail to the market was just released at the Float Life Fest, and it was the Mustache.
Mustache rails.
Yeah. I just saw a really cool review video from our dude Brooks, who was on show number 2. He was showcasing his Mustache rails and what he thought about them.
Yeah.
Dope video, guys, from Carve. I love
Check
those
it
guys.
out. Carve Creative.
So those are the first 3 rails to market for the GT. All right, so fourth to market, we have Matthew Shumaker with his new 357s, which, tell us about that.
We're going to be selling those. We're going to be testing them out, trying them, beta testing. That means you.
We're testing those?
Yeah, we're testing those.
Sick. Okay, so I'm going to be testing out the Truss version, a.k.a. the Skeletor version.
Yeah.
And Mattson is going to be testing out the solids.
Yeah, the solid version. So
Nice.
So 357, that name,
Yeah, break that name down.
yeah. So it's so we've got 3.5 degrees of tilt in the front, 4 different height adjustments in the middle, and then 7 degrees in the back.
Nice.
So you can make it higher, lower to accommodate for whatever you want.
So what's game changing about those rails, dude, honestly, is the height adjustment. I like the 3 in the front and the 7 in the back. However, no one for a while was making like a tail rails version for the GT. And so Mattson and myself, we both DIY'd our own tail rails.
I was gonna ask about that.
Yeah.
When are we gonna bring that one up?
Yeah, I'm gonna showcase those now through footage. And I went to Spider Mountain a couple weeks ago and I rode them as is after we made them. And I did like a radical kick up in the back with 13 degrees that made these pretty tall.
Whoa.
And I can still rock them kind of tall. I went to Spider Mountain and trust me, I really enjoyed them. However, I knew if they were a little lower that they would be like perfect, right? So why not strive for perfection, you know? And with those rails, I ordered the TFL half and half from Jake Leary, and I had to put those on, and now the board is perfectly dialed in. However, the rails, the 357s, have that built in.
Yeah, so you don't have multiple moving parts.
It's gonna be
be
sick.
perfect.
So if you want a little more clearance, or if you want to bring it down to have that lower center of gravity, they're going to be able to accommodate you with whatever you need.
Oh yeah, I think the biggest game changer is going to be the Skeletor version.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're I believe they're 25% stronger where they need to be versus the regular ones. They're also made out of a different
Aluminum.
different type of aluminum. So I think it's cool that they also have a little bit of flex to them. I know that Shoemaker breaks it down a lot more elegantly than I do, but in a vehicle it's called compliance, where the suspension sort of has a little bit of flex, and that's what these rails have built into them because they're hollow. So it actually makes them stronger rather than weaker.
Yeah, in the interview on this show, he's going to explain the flex, and it's going to be interesting. Kind of what I envisioned was, okay, when we're going down the trail and we're hitting maybe pieces of chunk, it's going to maybe not hit the rail as hard, because think about it. If you have less metal through these vibrations or through these chunks hitting, it might be less than it would be if it was solid. So it's going to be really interesting testing that part of these rails. All right, and also with the 357Ts, which is the truss version, people thought maybe they might be lighter. Well, that is not the case. They're actually the exact same weight as the stock. They are stronger because they have less aluminum, so the aluminum that is there is stronger than the stock, like you said.
Exactly.
But however, there is a functionality to these rails being like that. It's going to help out with overheating.
Yeah, so much more airflow.
And with the GT having that as a main problem, I can't wait to test that aspect as well. We are in winter, so right now the overheating isn't that big of a problem. But in the summer, oh my Lord, it is a huge problem. So we won't really be able to test that part hardcore until summer, but it's going to be interesting comparing the temperatures between me and Matson's rails during the testing.
I agree.
And as far as the 357Ts, in the description, we'll leave a link. Go ahead and get those. Pick those bad boys up.
They're going to be sick.
So let's go to our special guest.
Yeah, so we've been talking about his rails. Let's let the man himself talk about them.
Let's get it. Matthew Shoemaker, let's go.
What's going on? Matthew Shoemaker here. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show. Do you even trail, bro? Really thank you for your time. I know you're a very busy man.
Yeah, no problem.
You know, I've been seeing the Tech Rails brand ever since I got into the industry. I saw the switchblades. Those looked really cool. So how did you first get into one-wheeling? Yeah, like if you want to go ahead and just give a basic intro too, if you know who you are and all that as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much backstory you want. As far as just one-wheeling itself, that would have been June of last year. So it hasn't been that long. June of last year, I bought a pint for my boys. My one son's in his 20s, the other one late teens. So they were kind of fighting over it. My one son got himself a pint, my older son. So then I'm like, well, they're riding together. I want to get a one wheel also. So I got an XR with the mindset of putting suspension on it. And we can get into more of that another time. But I enjoy doing mechanical engineering work. So I bought an XR. I think that would have been August of last year. So, and within about 3 weeks, I had put my own homebrew suspension on it. Then promptly found out after the fact that Future Motion has a bunch of patents on suspension. So that put the kibosh on that. But I had, I don't know what, $3,000, $4,000 spent on one wheels at that point, and I wanted to get my money back. So I decided, you know what, let's make some frame rails and see if I can make a few $1,000s profit to pay for the one wheels and enjoy the hobby. I have numerous hobbies that I've done that with. You know, then Tech Rails officially started probably late September last year. So it's really only been 13 months that I've been making products.
Well, thank God you started one-wheeling. Really appreciate it. So we have basically the same story. Like I got my son, or you said your son just got his, or you didn't buy your son's, right?
I bought one for my boys, and then one of my sons got his own so they could ride together, and then I got a third one so the three of us could go.
Sweet. Yeah, so we got the same story. I mean, my son got a one wheel. It made me get an XR, and the rest is history, man. I mean, I'm having a lot of fun. So you say you had 3 boards and you wanted to get your money back, but now I think you have like 13, right?
Yeah. So I've got 13 boards. 2 are older pluses that are apart, waiting to get the full-on VESC treatment. And the other 11 are fully functional. I don't have boards that are apart not working just because they're not working. All my 11 rideable boards I ride all the time. The other 2 are only apart because of the VESC conversion that is pending.
All right, so what kind of trails, I mean, like where do you live? What kind of trails are around you? What kind of trails do you like?
So I live in northern Illinois, and we are right near Moraine Hills State Park. And it is what its name would suggest. There are a bunch of moraines from the Ice Age, terminal and lateral moraines in our area. And so they have a lot of walking and hiking trails in our area, and some of those are some are actually paved, some are just crushed limestone, and then some are pretty gnarly. And so that would be the primary trails that I ride. But I will say the bulk of my miles are just street, and mainly because I live in a suburban neighborhood area. And so one of my boys will come over. Only one lives with me. The other one is out on his own. They'll come in and say, you know, Dad, I got half hour. Let's go for a ride. So that's not enough time to throw the boards in a trunk and go to the trails. So we'll just do some street riding, or if we really feel up to it, we'll ride the boards the 6 miles to the entrance to the Moraine Hill State Park. and then ride there. So I have a mix, but I would say the bulk of my miles are ridden street. And then when I ride trails, I probably prefer grass. And part of that's because I can ride as crazy as I want, and grass is so soft that the odds of getting injured are pretty low. And I like the fact that I can't see what's coming in the grass. So there are a lot of sections in the Moraine Hills Park area that are either grass or just, prairie grass or whatever. And I really enjoy that because you can't see what's coming up and be able to prep for it.
Since you've been into the market for the last 13 months with making rails and whatnot, what did you do prior to this to really kind of, like, you're a machinist? Like, how did you know, like, what experience did you have that really put you on point to be this awesome rail maker?
Well, I'll condense it because it's kind of my entire life. So everyone's got their strengths and weaknesses. For me, I'm exceedingly gifted at mechanical problem solving. Almost as good at mechanical design, but mechanical problem solving primarily. And I learned that when I was younger building Legos, but people would hand me these little Chinese puzzles that have like loops and string and bent nails and stuff, and you got to like unweave them. And I could figure those out pretty quickly, but beyond that, I would look at the puzzle and know how to cheat it. I know how you're supposed to solve this, but I can get it apart a different way. Nice. And so my brain gravitates in that direction. And when I was younger, I would see, I don't know, this product, that product, whatever, and I'd look at it and go, oh man, there's a flaw here or a flaw there. And eventually, I'd say probably about the age of 12 or 13, I was building RC car kits. That would have been in the early 80s. I'm 51 right now. So in like 83, 84, when high-end RC car kits were just becoming a thing, I'd build the RC cars and find that there were problems with the design, and so I'd change it. And fast forward to about 15 years ago, I bought my first radio-controlled helicopter. And you want to talk about flaws, that thing was horrible. So eventually, within about a 6-month span, I had remade every single part on the entire helicopter, including the entire rotor head and tail rotor assembly, and started marketing parts for that. I was also into competition car audio in a really big way. Had cars featured in magazines and that. So, but the RC helicopter thing really, excuse the pun, but it really took off. But then the Chinese drones, the inexpensive drones, killed that $1,500 RC helicopter market. So I had to find something else, and I started making extremely high-end electric bicycle drive systems, made a bunch of those, and that introduced me more to lightweight personal EV. That kind of naturally progressed to the Onewheel a little over a year ago. I've had probably 6 or 7 mechanical design businesses, which sounds like a big deal. It typically is just me or myself and a partner, maybe 3 or 4 machine shops that I would subcontract work to. Yeah, I rent small store space, but it's not like I had 100 employees and some corporation. It was just typically 3 or 4 of us working in a small machine shop, and then outsourcing to larger shops. And then that gradually became the Onewheel thing. And, my wife just kind of tolerates it. When I get into a hobby, she just shrugs her shoulders, and she's like, all right, well, we'll see if this is an expenditure or if it makes us money. But it's been many years since I've had a hobby that hasn't turned a profit. I've bought a couple of Teslas, brand new Tesla cars, because I hold a patent for a product that I market for the Tesla Model 3 and Model Y. I have a YouTube channel that I started to pay for my first Tesla. Then I invented a part that brought in more than the car cost, plus the YouTube channel. So I bought a second car. And it just, typically it's a hobby that I don't mind spending on fun things, but I want that money to earn itself back. So, and then it was just a natural fit into the Onewheel realm.
Awesome. So you've made the Onewheel an asset. Awesome. You're a smart dude.
Yes.
Walk us through your mindset when you stepped on with your mind as an engineer and seeing problems and seeing how you can fix things. What was like the first thing that you felt that could be done better on those stock XR rails? Was it height? Was it kick up? Like, walk us through your thoughts.
Yeah. So the very first thing when I got on it was, well, the first thing I noticed was that, wow, this thing's really stable compared to the Pint. because the stock Vega tire is very flat and the Pint tire is very rounded. So it was easy to ride. But then after I rode it for any duration of time, the first thought was flat rails suck. I mean, that's my opinion. I know some people like them, but for me, I didn't. And as a sidebar, I've built a couple four-wheeled skateboards from scratch, as in TIG welded a frame and made my own deck. And I like a concave foot area, and one of the boards has a nose and tail kick-up. And I thought, I want to make rails that are angled at the nose and the tail. And so that got me into designing my first set. And there were a couple things that I did to come up with the 3-degree nose and tail tip up that is pretty much standard with the majority of my rails. That I came to in two ways. Number one was for me, at my height, my leg length, and the stance that I like to have on the board, the angle of inclination from my hips down to my feet happens to be 3 degrees per leg, or a 6-degree spread between the legs. So if I'm standing on a flat surface, my feet want to scoot outward. But if I tip the nose and tail foot pads up 3 degrees each, that puts a straight shot from my hips down to the foot pads and gives me neither an outward scoot or an inward scoot sensation to my feet, and just made me feel more connected with the board. So that was number one. Number two was, in the custom shaping, you can program up to 3 degrees of controller tilt in the XR software. And also with the Pint and the GT, elevated mode is 3 degrees. So that means that if you set it for elevated mode, the board will still ride flat. And so it's just all the planets were in alignment to go with 3 degrees.
All right, so your first set of custom rails you made, you're saying had the 3-degree kick in the front and the back, correct?
Yes.
What were the name of those called?
So that's a good question. So the first, trying to come up with a name was an interesting journey. The parts that I make for the Tesla car, I had to name those, and I based that off of my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is called Tech Forum. So my Tesla screen mounts, I just marketed under the Tech Forum name. So I was trying to come up with a name related maybe to a type of a sword or something. And then ultimately I'm like, you know what, just Tech Forum products for my screen mounts, that's fine. These are rails, so I'll just call them Tech Rails. Not realizing the Tech Rails name would take off as far as a line of products. I just thought, well, they're rails made under the Tech Forum name, so we'll call them Tech Rails. And that was supposed to be a placeholder till I came up with a better name, because I personally thought it sounded stupid. But everybody online was like, dude, Tech Rails, it's amazing. And
I love
so
it.
Stuck.
Heck yeah. So did you just make one set of rails the first time?
What was it now? 4 sets, 8. We made 8 sets of rails, 4 sets that had trusses on the sides and 4 sets that were flat-sided. All of those rails had 4 different axle hole positions to set ride height, and that was sort of a last-minute decision. I thought, well, I got to do more than just angle these things. So I added the axle height positions, which turned out to be a wise thing, because at the time I had no clue there were any other aftermarket rails. I didn't know such a thing existed. And but turned out that there were at least a couple other rail sets out there that had angles but no adjustable height. And so the adjustable height differentiated my rails from the others. And I didn't know that was even reality until like a month into the design and prototyping stage. I realized, oh crap, there's other aftermarket rails out there. Like, I didn't even know.
Nice. So you're telling me the first set of 8 rails that you ever made already had the height adjustments?
Yeah.
That's game changing, dude. That's sick. Okay. So you made your first set of 8 rails. Obviously you kept a couple. Did you end up selling a couple from that first batch, and that's kind of when you were like, you know what, I can really run with this because there's a demand here, people are excited, whatnot?
Yeah. So the agreement with everyone that got them from me was that they were going to post all their findings online. And I've been down this road before since I've been in manufacturing for many years, and I found that maybe 1 in 5 will actually do that, and that's pretty much what held true. All the smooth-sided rail guys, I think one guy posted a couple pictures, that was it. No one else did. And then of the rails with the trusses, I think only one person did. I apologize if there's someone else here and I'm wrong, but Stoker Jones, 801 Wheel, he got a set, and he just went ape over me. He was posting like crazy, and he became my biggest sort of pusher out there. And there were some minor issues. I asked the machinist to put threaded inserts into the aluminum, and he put helicoils in, not threaded inserts. And helicoils have issues when they're small like that. And, we had a couple little minor snafus with that first run, but everything else was, and they were a little too heavy. We didn't hollow them out enough and that. So there were a couple issues with the first run, but basically everyone's like, we love them, you should produce them. So then we made a run of 50 sets that were all signed and numbered.
And so the first set, after the first 50, those were called tech rails, or were those called the switchblades? I remember switchblades coming out. Was that the second run? Or?
Yeah. Well, so the tech rails were that was just supposed to be the name of the rails, which became the name of the companies. Switchblades is a different set of rails that are adjustable in position. The both front and rear foot pads you can set at various angles, and the name switchblade just came from the fact that you can switch the angle of the end blades of the rails.
That's it.
So it just came in, the name stuck, and then we stuck with blade and weapon names moving forward for a lot of our stuff, just because it kind of stuck.
Heck yeah. So with the XR model, how many sets of rails did you end up making? Like how many models? Like you had the tech rails, you had the switchblades.
So, oh my gosh, it seems like every time I do a run of rails, we make a change and usually then rename them because the change is substantial enough. So there was the original sort of OG trust rails, not TRUST, but TRUSSED, as in bridge trusses. Mm-hmm. So they're trussed rails because they have a zigzag bridge trussing look. And then the smooth-sided rails just stuck as calling them smooth rails. So we had the trussed rails, the smooth rails, and then after that, we came up with the switchblades. Let's see. After the switchblades, I had a number of competitors, guys that race, that asked for a very lightweight, very simple rail that was light but very rigid and strong. And again, struggling to come up with the name, I just called those race rails because it was for a handful of guys, a couple of which I sponsor, just sent them a set of rails. And the race rails don't have height adjustability built in per se. They use an axle carrier that clamps to the axle and mounts to each frame rail with 4 bolts per side instead of 2 to make them more rigid. Because of that, you can also remove a couple sets of screws and set them up one position or down one position. Mm-hmm. So that's another set of rails. And oh gosh, we did a couple of experimental runs where we made a number of rails with varying degrees of angle. We had one set that we just called 3-9 rails because they were 3 degrees at the nose and 9 degrees at the tail. Those were sort of game changer for us as a company because it gave us a direction to go with future production and GT rails, which we'll get into here in a minute. But with the XR rails, there's probably been 8, I think, different variations that we've made, and whatever it is, 200 or 300 different sets of rails that we've sold and shipped to this point.
Sick, man. Well, thank you for all of that work, dude. Seriously, that's really helping the sport grow, and I really appreciate all that sweat you're putting into this thing, so much appreciation. Oh yeah, real quick, before we get on to the GT, I noticed when you say the 3-9 rails, isn't that your preference? Isn't that your personal favorite ones?
Well, yeah, and the history of those is the switchblade rails were adjustable in angle, but not infinitely adjustable. They had positions you could set them for, and the nose could be set at 0 or 3 degrees, so flat or 3 degree angled up. The tail could be 0 degrees, 3 degrees, or 9 degrees, and that was by customer request. Some guys wanted 9 degrees at the tail, and I assumed they were going to run flat at the nose and 9 degrees at the tail. That was my thought. Well, the machinist that does the production, or did the production at least of that set of rails. He sent me a picture of them installed on his XR, and he said, I'm riding them 3 degrees at the nose and 9 at the tail, and I really love it. And I'm like, dang, I never thought to do that. So with my prototype switchblades, I set them that way, and I'm like, this is awesome. But it set the board too high. When you angle the rails up that steep, suddenly you're riding really high. And since the bulk of my riding is done street, I then lowered the ride height down. And so now my preferred setup for trails is 3 at the nose, 9 at the rear, and then 1/2 inch drop axle height. That being said, though, eventually I realized that I started having issues with my rear foot, and 9 degrees was just a little bit too much height. So that we've altered that for this, GT rails that we'll discuss in a bit here. But currently for fast off-road riding, I'm fastest with my 3.9 rails or with my switchblades that are set at 3.9. And then for the street, I'll either run 3.3 or 3.9, just depending on my mood. But I've learned to kind of despise flat rails. I just don't like them anymore.
All right, so now we're going to move on to the GT rails. Walk me through your first impressions or thoughts. Like, how did you even begin formulating the thought process for making rails for the GT? Like, they came out of nowhere saying, yo, we got this new model coming out. Like did you start formulating the plan then, or is you have to get the product in hand and then you just started re-engineering? Like, what was your thought? What was your process with that first set of rails?
Well, that requires one other comment, and that is related to our axle carriers that are they have a number of different features. Adjustable ride height is one, but they wrap around the axle, the motor axle shaft, and they clamp around it real tight. And then they also have fins machined in for cooling. But those axle carriers were a pivotal item when it comes to the GT, because the GT came out and it shares a similar rail structure to what the Pint uses. And the Pint uses what I call a captured carrier. They're kind of C-shaped or C-channel rails that capture around the axle carrier. And I dislike that design because it sort of forces the axle to stay in that position. It makes it very difficult to change the axle position. My axle carriers that clamp around the axles had adjustable axle height, which I'll put a plug in for Brad from Onewheel Parts. Brad and I had kind of a similar idea at a similar time. He and I got to know each other early on because he and I were working on adjustable height axle carriers kind of at the same time. And so that's how Brad and I got to know each other. And that's become an invaluable friendship that I've had. It's been great. Those axle carriers, when I was looking at the GT, I'm like, it has these captured C-channel rails. I don't like that. It's aggravating. And so I thought, well, the only way to make height adjustable that I could think of at the time was to make completely new rails that allow for an XR style axle carrier. So, and since I like angled rails anyway, and my preferred riding angles and the most request I get from customers was 3 at the nose, 3 at the tail degrees of angle, I thought, let's just design a complete rail set and axle carriers, our own ecosystem that does away with Future Motion's 2 long screws that go through the rail, through the carrier, and into the axle, and separate it to axle carriers mount to the axles, then the carriers mount separately to the rails. And we can then eliminate the C-channel design and allow room for the carriers to slide up and down on a flat surface, very similar to an XR. So that brought us to, okay, we now have a rail system of proprietary carriers that mate with our rails and our own titanium bolts. It's an entire kit now. And the majority of our rails that we sell at this point come with carriers as an assembly, because that seems to work best. That's what most people want. It just seems to be the best bang for the buck, although we do make some rails that don't require our carriers.
So the first set of rails that you made for the GT, there are 3 in the front, 3 in the back. Those were called the Saber rails?
Yep, Saber rails, and that's kind of getting us to the whole sword naming structure that I mentioned before that I had thought about when we first started the company.
Nice. So the GT comes out. How long did it take you? Did you get a GT right away? Did you pre-order one and get one pretty early on?
No, I didn't, and I was sorry that I didn't. Now, well, part of me was glad, part of me was sorry. I'm glad I didn't in the fact that some of the early GTs had a couple of issues, and not to get into that, but Future Motions resolved that, and they're fine now. Or, for the most part, any product can have issues, but the known issues are kind of a thing of the past. So the early boards had those issues. So I'm glad I waited because of that. But I wish I waited because I could have gotten on the ball more rapidly to make upgrades. But so I didn't order my first GT until March, and I got it in May. So I was really late to the party. That being said, though, our strength, I think, as a company, because I'm a mechanical problem solver primarily, our strength as a company is coming up with an idea. I come up with ideas and can prototype it and then rush it to market really, really quickly. So where, guys that already had their GTs for several months, had several months head start to start designing parts for them, we were able to, even though it was months later that we got our first GT, we were able to hit the market relatively early with aftermarket parts because of that, the rapid product development that is sort of part of who we are. Now, it hasn't been without its issues. I will say the first few sets of Saber rails, there were a couple of holes that were misdrilled that after I received them, I had to drill and countersink a couple of holes. And, we had a couple of really minor issues like that we had to work through, but that's sort of part and parcel of manufacturing. And that's why you do a beta run. We always make between 5 and 10 sets of rails and get them out there in people's hands to find those problems. And those customers are told, hey, there may be an issue. Please give us a chance to resolve it before you post anything negative online about it. Mm-hmm. And then we put things into larger quantity production. And I will say, too, I've been in a lot of industries for product development and marketing. And the Onewheel community have been the most forgiving people. If I forget a set of bolts in someone's, order or whatever, way more forgiving people than the other industries that I've been in. And the other industries, I get this really ticked off email, dude, what's the matter with you? For what I paid for this, it's crazy. Mm-hmm. Onewheel people are really laid back. Hey, I got my kit. Was I supposed to get such and such? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'll overnight it to you. And they're like, dude, it's no big deal. Thanks, man. I thought I might have lost them. Whether you lost them or not, I'm going to send them out to you right away. And everyone's like, so laid back and forgiving. It's a strange feeling. It really is.
One-wheelers are awesome. Man, having some rails already to market is super fast. I mean, you just got your GT in May. You already have a whole model out there. You've almost got a second model. Let's go ahead and your Saber was your baby. Like, how long ago did you start making this new rail that we're about to talk about?
So the new rail, that was, which I call them 357 rails, sort of a play on words, 357 Magnum gun. And that came from, I wanted a tiny bit more nose angle than the 3 degrees I had been using. So 3.5 seemed ideal. And I wanted the tail kicked up more than the 3 degrees that the 3.3 rails were, less than the 9 degrees of my 3.9 rails. And somewhere between 10 and 11 degrees of combined angle between the two seemed to be a sweet spot. So that's where I came up 7 degrees at the tail. So now we have 3.5 at the front, 7 at the rear. So they're 3.5 by 7 or 357 rails. And it's not that I dislike the 3 degree nose, 3 degree tail. In fact, that's still my preferred street setup. But I will say for aggressive trail riding or for really fast and really hard street carving, I want a little bit more tail angle. Mm-hmm. And so the 357 rails, that's their strength. But they differ from the Saber rails in a couple key ways, not just not just the difference in angles. The axle carriers are different, and the way that the carriers mount to the rails is different. And that was done to achieve greater axle positioning, greater number of height positions. The Sabre rails have 3 axle positions. The 357s have 4. The 357 rails have a greater spread of height position, greater height above neutral, and better wire routing through the axle carrier because of the mounting changes that we implemented.
Sick. So with the GT, right now to market, there's 3 rails. We have the Mustache, the Lightnings. Shout out to those guys. Cool rails. And then we have your rails right now, currently the Sabre rails. What is the process right now with these new awesome 4th to market rails, the 357s? Like, where are you at with that, and where's your ETA on maybe having those available for people?
Okay, so initially we made 1 prototype set of each variant of the 357. So the 357s are both flat-sided and have trusses similar to the XR rails, but there's a primary difference. The XR rails were flat-sided rails that also had trusses on top of the flat sides. The Sabre rails, we've eliminated the flat within the trusses, and they're like looking at a bridge. They're completely hollow through. There's a technical term, skeletonized, where it looks like a skeleton structure. You can see right through, where all of the structure is taken by the zigzag trusses. So we've got the trussed 357s that we're just calling 357T for truss, and then the 357 Magnums, which are the flat-sided. And we made one prototype set of each that the machinist has on his premises to test on his personal GT. And then we did a beta run, which there's alpha prototypes, which are the first, you usually make 1. And then there's beta prototypes, alpha and beta, number 1, number 2. Beta runs are typically pre-production prototypes where you set up, you make production fixtures, and you do a very short, full-on production run with anodizing, lettering, packaging. Like, these are production components, but in a very short production run to get them in the hands of a few key people to give up their feedback on the product, the packaging, and everything before we put them into volume production. And that's the stage we're at now. The 357 alpha prototypes, both flat and trusses, those were made 1 set each just a couple of weeks ago. And the machinist basically just validated screw hole position and, mounting component, making sure there were no component interference problems and all that. And then I gave the thumbs up for a beta run. So he made production fixtures and all that. And we made 4 sets of flat-sided 351 Magnums, and then 4 sets of the rails with the trusses. And the machinist is keeping a set of each. And then I will have a set of the trussed rails. And then there's just a few sets of trussed and flat rails that are going out to selected people that are either paying or, getting a discount or whatever on them to do some testing for me before we put them into full volume production. But we are set to pull the trigger on volume production. We could have them in the machine, in the CNC, within a week, once I give the machinist a thumbs up. So I'd say we are a week away from having these beta rails in hand. And then those will get tested for maybe a week, 10 days till I hear back from the testers. And then production will start, and we'll have them in stock a month after that. So we're probably a month and a half away from having inventory to ship, even though we're really only at the prototype stage right now.
That's fast. Yeah, so you're in the prototype stage right now. That's very exciting, dude. So these rails actually sound like they're going to be the perfect trail rails, because the other rails on the market, I really like them. It's just, man, with that height adjustment, that is so game changing when it comes to riding over chunk and having different trails that you got to ride on. So very much appreciated.
Well, and there's a lot to that. And also bear in mind that rails are like shoes. They are a very personal preference thing. I still get people that ask for flat rails. It's only maybe one customer out of every 25 or 30. but I still get people that ask for flat rails, and they prefer it. It's something about the way their anatomy is set up. Everyone's skeletal structure is different. Their riding style is different. So, I know people that have, for instance, with the Lightning rails, I know people that have bought Lightning rails and then bought my rails and sold their Lightnings, but I've also know people that have bought my Saber rails, sold them to stick with their Lightnings because they prefer them. But height adjustability is key. And along those lines, I did finally figure out a way to make height adjustable carriers work with that captured carrier rail design, that C-channel design that Future Motion does now with all of their current model boards. And we are making variants of those to fit both the Mustache rails and the Lightning rails. So I don't want anyone to think that our rails are the only option to have height adjustability. I'm making carriers, they're prototyped, and they're going into testing here shortly for adjustable height carriers, both for stock GT rails and the Lightning and Mustache rails. And I know the manufacturers of those rails, and we've been working closely together on those, which is another key thing. I prefer to work with other vendors rather than push against them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I feel like with this community, how it's brand new and we're trying to grow the sport, we all need to just band together and be just friends and homies and help each other out and push each other up. So for sure.
Yes, and everybody that I know of personally, I don't know that I know all of the aftermarket manufacturers, but most of them personally, and we're all pretty good about staying away from each other. I get people that will request that I make something that's really, really close to another product on the market, and I'm constantly saying I will not copy anything. Brad and I had this conversation with axle carriers. Because we were developing a similar product at a similar time. They had some key differences, but there were a couple similarities. And, we came to terms with that. And I've had to do similar things. I've had a couple reach out to me, a couple of manufacturers, and say, dude, just so you know, here's something we're working on. And I'm like, all right, no problem. I'll make a change. So, and I've had people do that with me too. Now, a couple people have just flat copied directly products that I make and just don't care and have done it. And I don't complain to them. I just let it go because the fanboys online will kind of bash that anyway. But for the most part, 90% of the time, aftermarket companies that I know stay away from each other. And hey, that's your thing. I'm not going to touch that. That you have that product, very cool. Very cool. You go with it. That's your thing. I'll do something else.
For sure. Shout out to all the guys making rails, the Float Life, Badger, Bob Stokes Shop, Mob's Board Shop. Man, you guys have done a lot of stuff for the industry as well, so much appreciation. But yeah, dude, I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing those 357s. So with the skeleton system on that particular rail setup, is that like the most extreme skeleton system you've ever done, or am I missing one of the old XR ones that are similar?
That's the most extreme, and that harkens back to my RC helicopter days. I was doing my own CNC milling machine programming, but I didn't know CAD, so I did line programming, which means I couldn't do radiuses because they're complicated in line code. So I was stuck making angles, and so I started making everything very angular. And I realized that the zigzag truss design, it's mathematically super strong and easy to program into a CNC. So that design carried over into my electric bicycle drive systems and a lot of one-off items that I've just made for myself in my workshop. So it was a natural carryover in frame design when I started making one-wheel rails. And with the XR, I was afraid to hollow out the rails completely and just leave the trusses to take the load. I don't know. It was just, I was afraid to do it. And I didn't have direct access to finite element analysis software and stress path calculation. But now I do. And we started doing some of the calculation and realized that we could hollow out these truss rails, make them stronger, and either make them lighter than stock and just as strong, or stronger than stock at the same weight. And that's what we've chosen to do with the 357T, is they're the same weight as flat-sided rails, but they're about 75% stronger. And that was accomplished by proper placement of available material. We removed material from where it wasn't structural and added it where it was most needed. And so as you look at the rail, the center of the rail nearest the axle sees the highest amount of stress load. So there's the greatest amount of material there. And as you get further and further toward the ends of the rails, there's progressively less and less material. It's sort of like it's like tapering something. Tapered bicycle spokes are that way, or the reason that a building is strongest if it's widest at the base and narrower at the top. And so that's what we've done, is we've optimized material placement by way of that open truss design. And it's also allowed us to tune the compliance of the rail. And compliance is basically the willingness of a material to move within a designed parameter or within a designed limit. Every piece of material bends or flexes. Every piece, doesn't matter. Glass flexes. Carbide, one of the most brittle materials, it does flex a little bit before it shatters. Every material flexes a tiny, tiny bit. And you can tune that flex to your advantage if you prefer. It's difficult to do with an I-beam or a C-channel design, but it's very easy to do, or it's not easy. It is more possible to tune it to the way you want it when you're dealing with individual elements like individual trusses zigzagging within an otherwise empty space. So this open truss design, it looks great, and I'm glad for that, but form follows function. Now, I'm not going to make something ugly. I don't care how well it functions. I got to make it look good too. But the primary function of those trusses was to make the rails stronger without adding weight. We've been criticized in the past. A few of our rails have weighed more than stock, and so people have complained about that. All right, fine. Let's start making them really light. Well, I don't want them to be light only. I'd rather lighten them and add some strength, and we've been able to achieve that by this open truss design, which we've also moved material around to make the rails flex in the areas we want them to flex. And again, every rail flexes. The stock rails do, lightning rails do, mustache rails. Every single solid piece of matter in the universe flexes. It just is. And you can use that flex to your advantage, or you can just ignore it. And we've chosen with the trussed rails, the 357Ts, to use it to our advantage to increase compliance, which means to reduce how harsh the rails feel, like the trail feel or the road feel, without making them spongy. I didn't want them to be springy, but I did want them to have some level of compliance. And when you design in compliance properly, you increase strength because you are allowing load to move the material a slight bit rather than trying to make it as rigid as possible. And eventually you hit a point of failure where the item will just fracture because it doesn't want to flex enough to compensate for the load given.
Well, sick, man. So with the design, it's the same weight of the stock. However, it's stronger. Now,
Yes.
with that design, is that going to help out with the overheating problem that the GT has?
That's a great question. So all of our GT rails have heat management or thermal management features built in. And it starts with the carriers. The carriers wrap around the axle. And for those that don't know, the bulk of the heat built up in a Onewheel is in the stator, which is epoxy to the axle. So the axle is the hottest part of the electric motor within a Onewheel, is this little over 1 inch diameter axle. So our carriers wrap around the axle and clamp to it because that increases surface area to pull heat from the axle out of the stator.
Nice.
And then there's fins on the carriers to shed heat. But the carriers mount with a large amount of surface area to the rails, far more surface area than the stock carriers do. That surface area transfers heat from the carriers then into the frame rail. All of our flat-sided GT rails have heat sink fins machined into the inside profile of the rails. Both the Sabre rails and the 357 Magnums have heat sink fins that are invisible. They're on the inside of the rail where you can't see them, but they're there to increase the surface area and improve cooling. Now with the trusses, we eliminated the internal heat sinks for a couple reasons. One was just looks. The open trusses, if you then had heat sinks inside, it would look a little odd. But also because the trusses already increase surface area on their own. They act like a heat sink. And with the trussed rails, we have heat sink fins built into the outside of the rails between the screw holes. The 357 Magnum rails have a few grooves on the outside by the screw holes just to mimic the side profile of a revolver. And but what we did is on the trussed rails, we took those three little mimicked decorative or visual slots, and we made them very, very deep to make that a heat sink. So now they're externally heat sinked. The trusses, the zigzag trusses, increase the surface area for heat sinking effect. And since the rails are open, you now can have airflow through the rails that not only goes through the rails for better rail cooling, but gets to the axle carriers and the wheel hub itself to cool the motor semi-directly then. So we haven't done any thermal testing on the trussed rails yet, but just sort of an understanding of heat flow characteristics, surface area, and materials that I know from doing this for many years. My guess is that we're going to see an improvement in cooling even beyond the improvement that we've seen with the other thermal measures that I brought up previously.
Awesome. All right, so Matthew, on behalf of Onewheel Parts, I really wanted to say I appreciate you allowing myself and Mattson to help with the testing and prototyping of the 357s. I'm getting the 357Ts, and then Mattson's getting the 357s. So yeah, man, I'm really looking forward to getting those and putting those through the test. They look like they're going to be game-changing rails, so can't wait. So with the height adjustment, which one do you think I'm going to prefer on the 357Ts?
I'm betting that you're going to, you're probably, now let me back up and say, you and I really have only known each other for a brief period of time. So I haven't had a chance to really dive into your preferences as much, but I would hazard a guess that you are probably going to like one of the center two positions. And the reason that I say that is that most street riding, it's great to have rails that are dropped pretty far, especially if there aren't any hills. If you're doing a lot of flat street riding, man, you want to slam those rails and have a rounded profile tire. For off-road stuff, you need some ground clearance, but if you get too high, it also becomes kind of squirrely. So my guess is that you're going to like the center two settings that are just because they are close to stock but not far off. I can't see that you're going to want it dropped really far because as a trail rider that you are, you're going to need some ground clearance. But I also don't think that you're going to like it all the way up. Some people do. Stoker Jones, 801 wheel, he jacks everything up to the moon. That is his preference. Some people like that. But my guess is you'll like the center two settings the best.
Sounds good, man. Yeah, I got some DIY tail rails inspired rails from Mattson, and like you said, the more degrees in the back, the higher it is. So we went a radical 13-degree kick up in the back, and so it's pretty tall. I've ridden them, and I can deal with it. However, I'm going to drop them a half-inch and see kind of just where they're at. With the 357s, on the second to the bottom holes, is that going to be about a half-inch, a quarter-inch? Like, where do you?
I have to actually think about this because we've made a couple of changes. So it's not the axle carriers have two rows of threaded holes for mounting to the rails, and then the rails have two rows, but they don't all line up. You can't use all four screws together. So the distance between the mount holes on the rails are, I believe, 1 inch between the top row and the bottom row, and then the rows of holes on the carriers are, I believe it's 0.4 inches between those two, and so you can move around. And I have to do the calculation, but if I'm remembering right, I think it's, let me see here, I think it's about 1/4 inch raise or drop using the center holes, and then it is like 800 thousandths, so a little over 3/4 inch raise or drop on the most extreme.
Nice. Man,
So I believe that's what we settled on. We kept shifting them a tiny bit here and there, but basically that, yeah. And so that's also what we found is if you go down like below 1/4 inch, like 150 thousandths or something, you really can't feel it. It takes about 1/4 inch of height change to notice it, but you get at like 1/2 inch and it becomes pretty drastic. So 400 thousandths steps has been what we found to be a very good number to move the axle by, because it's enough to be noticeable and tune the ride, and not so much that you go, whoa, drastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. So it sounds like these rails you're going to be able to dial in like all the way, because like with tires, PSI is that lever to really, really dial in that part of your ride. Now what you brought to the market is you can do that same concept with your rails, and that's just super amazing, super innovative. I really appreciate it, man.
Well, and you can couple all the adjustments with then PSI changes. Like, for instance, I used to ride it at 17 to 18 PSI. I'm 170 pounds all the time. That's just what I rode. And again, I ride street. I know that's high for trail riding, but I ride street more than I ride trails. So that's what I always ran. And because if I changed the PSI, it changed the height of the board, and I didn't really like that. Now that I can adjust the height of the board, I can set the height where I want, and then make the PSI based on the ride quality, not just the height that I'm looking for. I guess, yeah, in brief, again, thanks to Brad there from Onewheel Parts. Shout out to everybody that I've gotten to know, Jeff from the Float Life, and, Bob and John, and, all the guys I've gotten to know, Sonny, and just, everybody, Ori, and all the guys out there that I've gotten to know. I really appreciate all of you guys. And there's a lot we haven't talked about. I make machined aluminum controller boxes and my own machined aluminum wheels. Our product line is huge and growing. And a lot of that was just me, but some of it was input from other people, and you know who you are. And I just, huge thanks to everybody out there that has been there for me, and thanks to my customers, especially the ones that have been patient when I forgot to put screws in their box, or something else. Everyone's been great.
Congrats to you, man. And I'll let you get back to it.
All right, thanks, Jeff. It was great getting to know you, and take it easy.
Yeah, likewise, man. I'll hit you up later. All right, so Matthew Shoemaker, dude, the dude is a genius.
Yeah, way more elegantly than I could ever put it. Holy cow.
My elegant don't even match his elegant, so we're just 3 tiers of elegance. Shout out to Matthew Shumaker for evolving the sport and for being passionate about this stuff.
For real, it's hard to find these days.
All right, so before we leave, Austin, what is your favorite? If you could just build like some rails, what would you build?
Oh man, what I would build? Oh geez. Well, I would probably build something that definitely had angled foot pads, for sure. Something probably with a little bit of a lower center of gravity, and that's already been done though. That would just be what I would do.
So the W's?
They'd be kind of like W's, but I would make them more of like an S shape, more like rounded, like snake rails. If anybody's out there, you can use that name.
Nice.
If you want to make some rounded WTFs, snake rails, I think is the...
He's joking, Jeff. We're not making rounded WTFs. Dude.
No, we are not. We are not. But anybody else out there, feel free to use the name, all right? I think it would be sick.
All right, so that's the show. Man, you have anything to say?
Do you even trail, bro?
Do you?